everyone. Most of you know me. I am Morten Bay, PhD. I've got a new book out, and so I'm fortunate to be able to present it to you today. And given that, so for those of you who weren't here before, we had a faculty meeting where we had some, let's just call it downer news. I'm just going to leave it at that. That sort of is tangential to what I'm going to be talking about. But let me put it this way. I'm going to try and look a little further out. I'm going to try to see how things might look, first of all, how we get out of the quagmire that has caused this current situation we're in, because that's what the book is about. And then I'm also going to try to propose a way forward so that we don't get here again once the next 4 years are sort of over and done with. The book is called Mediating Plureality. It's going to come out on Friday. And it's I realized that I did something stupid when I named this book because I forgot we have something called autocorrect. And that means that every single time, not only does Amazon get my name wrong because it's with an E at the end instead of an O, so I keep being redirected to salt. And it's either that or what people try to find mediating plurality. Fortunately, there's not a book called that, but if enough people buy it or enough libraries buy it, hopefully that will change. So the subtitle of the book is Technology, Perception, and Ethics in a Divided Democracy. And what I'm going to try and do today is essentially talk a little bit about an ethical approach, so using morals to try and address the situation that has gotten us where we are today. So this is not working. That's fine. Shall we just do this? So this is where we are today. I wonder if I can get this there. Probably not. That's probably just going to have to. You're going to have to live with that thing up there. So I don't think I have to tell you that we are living in a time of affective polarization. So affective polarization, for those of you who aren't necessarily that familiar with that term, is about how we're not just politically polarized, but we're also emotionally or even sort of not just ideologically, but we basically hate each other based on two different divides right now, which is the current state of affairs here in the U.S. And when I started looking at this for the book a couple of years ago, one of the things that I found was that this started happening a lot earlier than people otherwise think, or what people have been saying. So if you look at this data, for example, which is from the American National Election Studies, you can see that the sentiment towards people from the other party starts splitting already around 1990. Now that kind of flies in the face of the idea that a lot of people have that this is something social media caused. I just want you to stick that in the back of your head right now, because I will return to that. The other thing that's sort of a little scary about this is also this number, that recent polls show that this is from an Ipsos poll that was from October 2024. New York Times Siena poll that says that about 58% of people, this is right before the election, believe that the system needs total change. Either it needs to be, democracy needs to be scrubbed completely, or it needs massive change. I don't think I want democracy to change that much personally, but let's move forward. With this polarization comes political violence. In 2022, in late 2022, Reuters did a big study about how different forms of political violence has risen during this time where we've been so polarized. We're actually now at a point where it's the worst since it's been since the 1970s. And with a major difference being that in the 1970s, it was mostly property that got damaged, not people. Now it's the other way around, which is kind of scary. Now, a lot of the time it's been, as some of you probably would expect. It's been a lot of people from the right that have been harming people from the left, but it's not that clear a picture anymore. And especially, of course, one particular incident being rather telling about this. And this is, of course, something that happens after Reuters did their study. So we are seeing a massive rise in political violence, which is usually something that precedes something big. It could be anything from a revolution to a coup to authoritarianism. And as I said before, a lot of people have blamed sort of over the years social media for this. Right now, this was the Ipsos poll I was talking about before, from January of last year. A quarter of Americans said that it was about that this whole thing was caused by social media. This is, I think, kind of, I just had this in here a little bit of an irony. This is actually from when the last Trump administration came in. I just find it really ironic that somebody writes, "This is all social media's fault" on LinkedIn. I mean, really? Anyway, these are the numbers from last January. So right after, or last January, from the Ipsos poll about what people think about media in general and social media. And so what we're seeing here is that, yes, there's some differences in terms of whether we're talking about Republicans or Democrats. But one thing we can say is that all Americans, about 45% of them here, believe that social media mislead people. Okay, so that's, don't worry, this is not going to be about how truthful social media is, but it's going to be about how social media content probably isn't what these people think it is in terms of the effect on affective polarization. So let me go into that. As I mentioned, the tendency towards this started a lot earlier. And when I started looking at the sort of classic GSS General Social Survey data for trust in government and trust in media, the media, as in the press, as in news media, this is what came up with going all the way back to the Watergate era. And so what we're seeing is a downward trajectory with some bumps, like 9/11. Obviously, we all know that there's a big rise in both trust in media and the White House and Congress. But what happens if we take that out? Well, then we can see that the trajectory is a lot more sort of regularly downward. But we can also see that something weird happens around 1990 and 1991. Now, there's a massive drop-off right there. And by the way, this is replicated in other surveys from around the same time, in trust in government. So I was thinking, what is this? Now, a lot of people will then say, oh, that's got to be Fox News. But Fox News doesn't start until 96. So it's not Fox News. What it is what I believe is the beginning of all of this, which is talk radio. Now, talk radio in itself is not necessarily what causes this. There is, for the first time after the fairness doctrine is eliminated in the late 80s, there is for the first time the option of going on public airwaves and actually being partisan. So that does help. But what's interesting, I think, is that it's when you look at how people viewed talk radio back then, what they were saying about why they liked the medium, they all said it was because it was more interactive. It was more that they were actually able to have a voice, that they were talking to people that thought like them. They were in a community, they felt, with the host. The host seemed approachable. All things that we now have sort of these days assimilated into how we think about social media. But the actual affordances that social media has that people like was already beginning to show up in the talk radio medium. Now, this is, if you look at, I know this is covering it, but basically what we're looking at here is not the drop off in trust in Congress and the White House and media, but the distrust of it. So I've reversed it just to give you a correlation together with the rise of talk radio in popularity. And if we look at 1990, 1991, 1993, you see that there is a fairly good correlation there. Actually, if we look at it, it's pretty strong positive correlation that's going on. So again, ice cream and the summer and murders and that classic correlation isn't causation thing in mind. It seems like there's something there, right? So I've been so I sort of started looking at that and going a bit more into the details about it. So looking at what people were saying back then about it, we found that, first of all, again, people felt it was more interactive, more accessible, more relatable. Back then, it was a lot of the right-wing personalities that we know now from right-wing TV started out, but also from left-wing TV started out back then. So it was kind of a time when people started getting used to these voices. But the real big thing that happened, I think, and this I know is common knowledge to everybody in this room. However, I don't think we may, as media and communication scholars, have looked at it in this perspective yet. The thing that actually makes the change, I argue, is the changeover from low to high choice media environments. So it's not so much what media we change to, but the fact that there's more of it and more choices. This is a timeline that I've just shown of how things move ahead in the changeover to high media choice, and that high media choice environment, high choice media environment, that's what starts here as well. That's where we start seeing with talk radio becoming something that people can use, and then you get cable news, mobile media, smartphones, and onwards. This is going to show up again later in another context. Okay, so just to sort of go further into this idea of whether this was caused by social media, there's two papers that I find are really sort of hitting the nail on the head with this. One is a review or meta study done by Lawrence Green et al. In 2022 that looked at 496 studies of digital media broadly, also social media, and how the effects were on democracy and participation and polarization. And one of the things they find is opposite to what is sort of maybe the instinctive way you would look at it or intuitive, that there's actually more polarization when you get confronted with other people's views. So in media literacy, for example, we've constantly been bombarded with this idea, no, we need to get people to have a broad media diet. They need to be exposed to other views. They need to be able to see what else is out there. But that, according to that study, is actually just going to make people even more polarized. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them being that one of the reasons why people go on social media to see other people's views is to be combative and is to actually actively participate in taking them down. And that activity in another study that Turnberg did in 2022, I think really sums it up. It's not so much about the viewing of other sources or getting information from different sources. It's about connecting people. Now, obviously, social media was there for connection to begin with, but what this is saying is it's not the content, it's the people you meet on social media. And that social media in general is more, the way it contributes to polarization is by helping you define your in-group more than it is the actual information or content that's on there. You help you find your in-group, and as we all know, that because of the amplificatory nature of social media, that can then in your in-group, because it can help you isolate yourself in your in-group to a very, very strong extent. People can get very isolated there. Now, this is not what we normally talk about as filter bubbles or echo chambers, because that's all about the content. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people finding each other and then somehow creating communities around issues, for example, that they share. So it's the actual social relations that are helping to build this polarization through outgroup bias. Okay. So the solutions to this from our field have been many, right? There's been, you know, I don't know if Gabe is here, but I'm sure if Gabe was here, he would probably like that one. You know, we need more professional journalism. We've talked a lot about media literacy and fact checking, right? Well, one of the things, and Jillian, this is where you're going to start hating me. One of the things I argue in the book is that none of that is actually helpful. It's not that we should get rid of it, because it is it's helpful for other things. But one thing it doesn't do is stop affective polarization. What we need, well, this is, by the way, what inspired that way of thinking. This is Dana Boyd, who in the always wonderful Dana Boyd, as I usually preface it, her South by Southwest keynote in 2018 made a very big impression on me when she was basically advocating for a more epistemological approach to how we think about media and its impact. And I actually think that is exactly right, because what ends up happening essentially is that those of us who may be on a specific side in this debate, I have a feeling we're all on the same side in this debate in this room, but what might end up happening is that we just say that it's our way of looking at it that ends up having epistemological authority. And I'm not quite sure that that's helpful. It's not helpful to tell somebody in any form of discourse that they're crazy if you want them to listen to you. Cici Papakarisi has also come to some of these conclusions that in her book, I think it's called After Democracy, she has this line: obliterating the opponent's viewpoint by completely delegitimizing it. That's not democratic discourse, and it actually exacerbates affective polarization rather than anything else. So we need to get away from that. Another person that's starting to come to this viewpoint is not Mark Zuckerberg, but Bill Adair, who founded PolitiFact. So here's a fact checker, right, who's saying, you know what, we might have to start thinking about something else. So he recently wrote this article in The Atlantic based on the book he's done now. And the one thing I wanted to sort of, this is all good, but the one thing I wanted to sort of grab onto there is we need to think bigger. And this is also why I'm saying, you know, I'm thinking what's going to happen in 2029, right? The reason why I was not perhaps as outraged, I was pretty angry, but not outraged at when this thing happened, is that I see this as just pure political opportunism. You know, if it had been the other way, Meta would have done something else. And that I find despicable and honestly not very democratically minded. The question is what kind of damage it's going to make. And I actually don't think this is going to do so much damage as we think it might. Because exactly the point that it doesn't seem like it's the content, but the community that on social media that creates the affective polarization. So thinking bigger. One of the things that I argue in the book is that we've basically learned the wrong lessons from all these advances that we've had since what we could call the shift from low choice media environments to high choice media environments. We've learned what we've ended up becoming are epistemologically overconfident because of all the information that's available, and because honestly, news media helped us along the way to think that there is something that we can talk about as the truth, objective, absolute, universal. And that's just not the case. At least if we look at a very, very long history of thought. So if we go back to Kant, 244 years ago, Kant established that no, there is no way we can know objective reality. It's just not possible. And just recently, within the last 40 years, there's been a movement towards construction of reality in neuroscience, in what we know as predictive coding. So it's like we've forgotten everything that happened in between maybe the Second World War into postmodernism and up until this moment that we're living now. It's like that whole idea of us being able to say, are we really able to know what objective reality is? It's like we forgot that. Anyway, two philosophers who didn't, was Michael Patrick Lynch and Ray Langton. Michael Patrick Lynch says, and I agree with him on this, that we have become epistemic. We've adopted epistemic arrogance. We've become epistemically arrogant in the sense that we think we know better than the person next to us what reality is. And the problem with that, as anybody that has worked with any form of, and I'm going to say it, DEIA, hope somebody hears that, that anybody who has worked with that will know you cannot know the experience of another person. Not until we figure out a way to, pop electrodes on somebody's head and have a virtual experience that way. It's not going to happen. You cannot know what another person is going through. You cannot know what it is. I cannot know as a pale male and stale individual. I cannot know what it is to have grown up in the U.S., to be a woman, to be black, to be homosexual. I can never get into that mode. It's not possible. So there will never be a moment where we can actually talk about an objective reality that we all experience together. But we seem to have forgotten that because we're acting as if we can. Now, Ray Langton, a British philosopher from Cambridge, she's a lot more attuned to this, as is Michael Patrick Lynch. And they both advocate for epistemic humility, which has been a rising trend in epistemological thought. And a lot of epistemologists like Timothy Williamson and the late David Lewis, these kind of people were very onto this. And I just wanted to sort of try and bring that into our field. So how did we get to this arrogance point? Well, we've already talked a little bit about how there was this to a high choice media environment. And if we go back and look at this timeline, what we're seeing is that the media choices that we have are more and more personal. They're also higher and higher in information. That's not new. We all knew that. But what is the effect of that? What's the cumulative effect of that? Well, it is that because we feel that we can get information at our fingertips, and because we trust the device, not necessarily the content, but the device itself, we are much more likely. This is something I haven't tested empirically, because as a part-time employee, I can't get funding. Just throwing that out there. But the point here is that there is a tendency to immediately, heuristically trust what comes out of our devices, and then in the secondary sort of consumption of it, maybe distrust it. But the initial, we trust our devices to be bearers of truth, whether they do it or not. Does that make sense? Like that we trust the device, but not necessarily the content once we consume it. And as we have moved forward, there's a parallel development, right? Where we also see big data coming along, data science, predictive analytics, the mis and disinformation trend, predictions during COVID, and generative AI, which are all based on a form of prediction that hasn't been very impressive compared to what they actually promised us back here. Now, lots of prediction going on, but the question is still the old questions from statistics. If you throw garbage in, there's going to come garbage out, right, at the other end. And so the likelihoods and there are tons of studies that show that these are, Karl Popper calls it prophecies rather than predictions. And I'm not sure I want to go that far. We'll get back to Popper in a bit. But the further out we go, obviously, that's just statistics, the more difficult it is to be accurate in your prediction. And unfortunately, a lot of these big data, the sort of big data wave that we have, the predictive analytics wave that we have, they were doing some predictions that were very, very epistemologically overconfident. And that's exactly what I think is the theme for Silicon Valley right now. Also, when you look at moral things and ethical things like that, blanking on the name right now, but that movement they have, Dimitri, maybe you can help me, the movement they have for sort of long-termism and effective altruism is what they're talking about. That whole thing is complete garbage and nonsense. Why? Because we can't know. Like this, we have known this for 244 years. Okay, anyway. Now, one area where there's been some and it comes as a reaction to big media institutional news coverage. So if you look, this is data from LexisNexis. If you look at references to the truth, right? As if one single objective truth exists. When you start seeing how that was used, it's at roughly the same time. It's a little later. It's roughly at the same time as the rise of talk radio. We start seeing the curve going up around the time that Fox News and MSNBC comes around. They really start going up. And we have a little bit of a dip around the financial crisis, but slightly before 2016 and the big misinformation boom, we see this massive rise in people talking about the news. Now this is, I believe this is newspapers, and then here you have broadcast TV and cable news. So you can see that up until the 90s, we don't really talk about the news. The truth in the news, as if it's something that everybody knows. But all of a sudden, there's a patent being taken out on the news here. People are claiming that on the truth, that as if people actually know what they're talking about. But as many philosophers have dealt with across both analytic and continental philosophy, haven't we already settled this? There is no objective truth to be known. So how can the news tell us that there is? Well, as George Gerbner and our own Larry Gross figured out many years ago, you keep telling people enough in a mass medium, and they'll start to believe it, right? Cultivation theory. Well, that's basically what's happened with the truth, I claim. The fact is we have become epistemically arrogant because we've been told that it is possible to be epistemically arrogant, that we, with technology and with data, can get to an objective truth. Now, what I would argue is that, no, we cannot. And now it's going to be even more difficult as AI and XR really start taking hold, especially, of course, AI. Just to give you an example that's kind of fun, this is the ad for this event that Marcom was threw together very quickly, and I applaud their speed and thank you for that. But that's not me. At least that's not my ears, and it's not my shoulder, and I've never been to that place that they have in the background. This is the image I sent them. Now, as you can see, I'm not a very vain person. I don't mind that my ears stick out a bit. But the point here is important. The point here is they didn't just come back to me and say, do you have a widescreen image? I don't think they had time. And in all fairness, that's fine. I would rather have it out quickly and have an AI image on there. And by the way, the function in Photoshop that does this is something I use myself every single day when in my practice as a tech journalist and when I edit images for the small tech blog in Denmark that I write for. So I don't have any problems with this. But nobody told me this, right? Nobody said to me, this is we're gonna have to AI your image to make it fit our ad. And there's no watermarking here about this being an AI changed or AI altered image. Now, this idea that these kind of AI changes or generative AI changes are just imposing on us without us knowing about it, call that AI creep. And no, it's not me that's an AI creep. It's AI that creeps, okay? And this is happening as sort of a movement that's being encroached upon us, especially by the tech industry. If you look at all three of the main, not three, but the two main phone manufacturers in the world, Apple and Samsung, as well as Google in their Pixel phones, they are essentially now saying the same thing that Kant did. You can't know what the reality is, so we're going to create one for you. Like, they are already on board with the fact that what you are shown as in a smartphone photo or any digital photo really is not going to be reality. It's going to be closer to your memory, and if not, we'll define that memory for you of what it was like. This is Isaac Reynolds from Google who does this for the Pixel phone, and here's Patrick Chaumet from Samsung, who says the exact same thing. Now, is this something that we should be alarmed about? A lot of people are. Like, there's Sarah Young from The Verge. The Verge has been this tech medium online has been writing a lot about this. And we briefly lived in an area where the photograph was a shortcut to reality, to knowing things, to having a smoking gun. Nobody is ready for this. I don't know about that. I mean, Susan Sontag kind of said this in the 70s, and her longtime partner, Anne Leibovitz, said it just recently in terms of AI. I think we know. But here's where the AI creep comes in, and where it starts to get sort of where we need to be on guard and at least start thinking about things in a different way. So this is an image that shows the upscaling technologies that you can find in all kinds of TVs. This is from Samsung. Samsung pioneered this a few years ago. So what we're looking at is an AI algorithmically driven upscaling technology that can take your in the case that I've seen demonstrated in person, your 4K signal and get it up to 8K, so 4 times the resolution. Now, that's wonderful if you want a sharper image, but just think about it. This is not just what the old style of upscaling, where you just take a pixel that's next to, or replicate one pixel that's here over here, so that you get 2 pixels that looks roughly the same. Here you have an AI predicting what it is that should be there, right? And just to give you an idea of how much we're talking about, this is the classic difference, the classic way of showing the difference between 4K and 8K. This is 4K. This is what most of us have in our TVs right now, right? This is 8K. And so what is happening is essentially this is being guessed into this. Like, all of that, 75% of the image is being guessed by the AI. So the question is, does it do that well? What kind of algorithms is it using? What's the training data? All those different AI problems that we've been discussing now for a few years come into play with this, except for the fact that the way it's being sold to us is as, oh, you're going to get a sharper picture. But you might not. You might also get a more inaccurate picture. An example a friend of mine who I've worked with for a while said was, you know what? What about tennis? If you're watching a tennis game, Wimbledon, for example, and it guesses the ball hits the line, and you've got a predictive algorithm saying, oh, I think that ball was out. It's going to show you that the ball was out. And you now have a conflicting memory against what the umpire or referee or whatever it's called in tennis might actually have said or judged, right? I think that is, it's demonstrative, illustrative of the problem that we have with media representation and in the AI age and reality. And so in my mind, that battle is already lost. We are not going to go back to a point where we could trust any form of visual documentation like this. There is no going back to that. And that's going to obviously have massive implications for justice, for law enforcement, for so many different things. But I don't think there's any way of going back. Why? Because we are now in a high choice media environment, and we are not going to go back to a low choice. Nobody wants that. So I don't think we're ever going to have any form of regulation that will be as in depth as this. And how are we going to in an age of AI, ask, for example, Samsung to not upscale in a certain way? Are we going to be able to regulate at that granular a level? I don't think so. So what do we do instead? Well, I go back to my old, well, David calls her his spirit animal. I would say my greatest inspiration, at least in the last few years, Hannah Arendt. This is not necessarily only Hannah Arendt's way of looking at things. This is replicated in a lot of thought from a lot of other 20th century philosophers. But this idea that we talk about different types of truth and reality, right? We talk about rational truth, which is what we can present strong evidence for, science. I'm not going to debate with a Trump activist about whether the Earth is flat or not. We have very good evidence that it's not. Okay, now that's rational truth, scientific, philosophical, ethics, those kinds. But then there's factual truth, which is the constructed truth that we all come to together, right? So Hannah Arendt has this great example of whether people will remember that in the First World War, Belgium didn't invade Germany. It was the other way around. And that sort of collective memory it might be wrong on a scientific scale, but it's something that we still need to construct and debate together to get there, to get to the point where we can figure out whether it's wrong. And so one of the things along with Arendt, who already advocated for this against totalitarianism in the 50s, I argue we need to start talking more to each other to get to that point, to be able to construct a common reality again. Make reality great again. Make common reality great again. One of the things, this is where Karl Popper comes in. One of the things that Karl Popper said that I thought was so brilliant, he's not a relativist in any shape or form. He's somebody who very strongly believes that scientific truth is scientific truth. But one of the things he does say is that there are sort of similar to what Hannah Arendt says, there are things that are harder to measure, one of which is systems that are not isolated, stationary, and recurrent like modern society. I'm not saying that social science doesn't work, neither does he, by the way, in the book that he writes here. What he's saying is we should be cautious with projecting too much into the future with that. And I think that is very true. So what we need, I think, is a cultural shift. We've done it before. Child labor, tobacco, drunk driving, all of these have become moral cultural shifts. These are things we find to be relatively immoral or at least problematic for society in general. And I think we can do that with the way that we talk to each other and accept each other's reality again. I don't really have the time to go into the depths of the plurality model that I suggest for this in the book, but the overall idea is to say that there is an objective reality that we can't get access to, that has an impact on the collective realities that we all have in our heads together, from which we can then build a perception of mediated realities, and so I call it mediated plurality, and physical reality, which is matter, right? And those two, taking into account the predictive construction of reality that happens according to the predictive coding framework in neuroscience. Basically, what we're seeing there is that this part is something that we construct, so we should respect that other people also have that construction going on in their heads. Just to get to the end here, the way I frame this is, like I said, from a moral standpoint, that I think we need to get to the point where we start talking to each other again. We need to respect the others, so the people that we disagree with the most, as people who actually have real experiences of what they're saying they experience. When they say that Trump lost the election, they literally see Trump losing the election, winning the election, right? When he said that, let me rephrase that. I'm trying to get to the end here. When they said that Trump won the 2020 election, that's what they experienced. That's their reality. We might have seen something different based on different types of knowledge, but they experienced it as their reality. And we need to respect that if we want to get them to trust us enough to persuade them the other way. So I know it's not popular right now as we are being bombarded, especially also on the center left, as we're being bombarded with executive orders that are completely dismantling the system that we were hoping to have for a long time. I know it's not popular to say, oh, we just need to talk and listen more. But I really think that anything else has been tried, right? We've tried everything else. We've tried hardcore resisting, just being like pushing back. We've tried media literacy. We've tried fact checking. We have tried professionalizing or talking about how we can make the news more factual. None of it helps. This has been 8 years now since 2016 when Trump was elected the first time. And some of us have been looking at disinformation and misinformation a lot longer than that. I wrote an op-ed in 2015 warning about the Russian meddling in social media for that election. Some of us have been looking at this for a very long time. And as somebody who has, I just got to say, the only thing that's going to help is if we actually try to reach the people that we are around that believe something different with us by getting them to trust us. And to do that, I think we need to think about ethics of epistemic humility. We need to think about the fact that we need to facilitate common reality co-construction. We need to be able to think about what Rawls calls reasonability, which is rational thought, but including everyone else's rational thought. Chantal Mouffe's idea of agonism instead of antagonism, as agonism is, as you know from medicine, for example, that we try to Socratically build by build an argument by putting up an opposing view and discussing it under friendly terms. And I also really believe in Martha Nussbaum's ideas of capabilities as rights. Now, this is more on the platform side. So what this, of course, comes back to is that these ethics are not just about how we as users interact in the media, but also how the media platforms should facilitate common reality construction, should facilitate reasonability, all of that. So I in the book, in the end, I have a section on where I kind of argue for these things. And that's it.